Hello, dear listener. Welcome to another quiet evening with the sleepy philosopher. I'm truly happy you're here. Tonight, let's take a gentle walk through mystery, wonder, and imagination together. Now, before we begin our soft journey, I invite you to do something simple and kind. If you enjoy these peaceful bedtime stories, please take a moment to like this video. Subscribe to the Sleepy Philosopher, and if you feel inspired, share your own thoughts or dreams about tonight's story in the comments. I love hearing what you imagine. Now let's talk, very slowly, about something curious, something hidden, something known only in whispers. Area 51, a name that stirs questions, a place hidden in the Nevada desert, wrapped in silence and stars. People say it holds secrets of flying saucers, of visitors from other galaxies, of strange shapes in the sky. But tonight, we won't chase fear or wild stories. Tonight, we'll explore a different kind of truth, a gentle truth, full of desert winds, silver light, and quiet wonder. So lie down, rest your head, and let your breath slow down. We are going to the desert now, to a place where time drifts like sand, and everything is calm. Are you ready? Let's begin. The desert does not speak loudly. It doesn't shout or rush or argue. It whispers, slowly, gently, like an old friend who speaks only when the time feels right. In a quiet corner of Nevada, where the sand rolls endlessly like a golden ocean, there is a place that many have heard of, but few have truly seen. Area 51. Some say it is a military base. Some say it holds strange secrets. Others say it is nothing but a patch of sand and silence. But the desert knows the truth, and the desert does not hurry to tell it. In this soft and sleepy land, there lives a man named Eliot. Eliot is not young, and he is not old. He is just Eliot. He wears soft flannel shirts, drinks chamomile tea with honey, and walks slowly with his hands behind his back. He lives in a small wooden house just outside the restricted zone, where signs warn people not to enter. But Eliot never tries to go near. He doesn't need to. He's not chasing the truth. He's waiting for it to come to him. Each morning, Eliot rises with the sun. The light spills across the desert like warm milk. It touches the hills, the cacti, the rust-colored rocks, and finally, Eliot's window. He opens his eyes slowly, stretches without a sound, and lets the silence sit with him for a while. No alarms, no busy rush, just the gentle hum of the earth turning. Outside his window, the world is quiet. A few birds stir. The wind brushes through the dry bushes. The sand shifts slightly under its own weight. Nothing more, nothing less. Eliot makes tea, always tea. And as it steeps, he watches the horizon, where the land seems to melt into the sky and the heat dances like small spirits over the sand. He does this every morning and every evening, and sometimes, in the stillness between, Eliot wonders. He doesn't believe in wild stories or loud claims. He's not interested in proving anything, but in the silence, he can feel something, waiting, something just beyond the veil of the ordinary. Locals sometimes talk in hushed tones, about lights, about shadows that move in strange patterns, about machines that make no sound as they pass overhead. Eliot listens. He never laughs, never argues, never agrees. He just listens. Because Eliot believes the desert speaks to each person differently. What one person sees as mystery, another may see as peace. And Eliot, he sees the desert as an old book, written in a language only the soul can read. One afternoon, He sat on his porch with a journal in his lap. The sun had softened, casting long shadows, and the wind had cooled to a whisper. Eliot opened his journal, turned to a blank page, and simply wrote, "I do not need to find the truth. I only need to be still enough for the truth to find me." He looked up then, far into the distance, past the hills, toward the place they called Area 51. He didn't expect answers. He didn't need them, but something inside him felt warm, as if the desert had nodded, as if it had gently said, "Yes, you understand." Later that evening, as stars began to bloom in the velvet sky, Eliot wrapped himself in a blanket and sat outside once more. The night air was cool, but not cold. The moon was rising, fat and golden, and for a moment, just a small moment, Eliot thought he saw something. A soft shimmer, like a silver thread dancing across the horizon. It moved slowly, quietly, as if it didn't want to disturb the peace. And then it was gone. He smiled. Not surprised, not confused, just calm. He sipped his tea and looked back at the stars. In the desert, you don't chase things. You let them come to you, if they wish to. That night, Eliot fell asleep without even realizing it. The chair rocked gently. The wind hummed a soft song, and the sand whispered its secrets into the darkness. The truth about Area 51? It wasn't something loud, or bright, or fearful. It was something soft, something slow, something you could only hear when everything else had grown quiet. And Eliot, he was ready to listen. Eliot had always believed that the universe was more vast than anyone could truly understand, and perhaps not everything was meant to be known. Some things, he thought, were designed to stay hidden, not out of fear or secrecy, but out of kindness. Like a dream that fades softly when you wake, some truths were not meant to be grasped, only felt. And so, Eliot never tried to force answers. He simply lived quietly and gently in his little home by the desert, letting the world unfold around him like a slow and delicate song. Each day began the same. The soft sound of wind slipping through the cracks in the window, the light aroma of dry earth, and the golden fingers of sunlight stretching across the wooden floor. Eliot would rise slowly, put on his worn slippers, and make his way to the kitchen. His kettle, old and faithful, would begin to hum with a low melody as he prepared his morning tea. He never rushed it. He would stand by the window and watch the horizon glow, the sky painted with gentle shades of pink, lavender, and amber. Eliot's home was filled with books, some old, their pages yellowed and whispery, and some new, untouched, and full of quiet promise. He had a small writing desk by the window where he often sat, pen in hand, recording his thoughts. He wasn't a writer in the traditional sense. He didn't publish his work or share it with others. But he found comfort in writing. To him, it was like speaking to the universe and knowing that even if no one answered, the stars were still listening. It was during one of these slow, golden mornings that Eliot found himself thinking more deeply about the shimmer he'd seen days before. That strange, soft light that moved across the desert without sound. It hadn't frightened him. In fact, it had calmed him, like the glow of a lantern in the fog. But still, it lingered in his thoughts, like a line from a poem he couldn't quite finish. He didn't tell anyone about it. Not because he feared disbelief, but because the moment felt too sacred to explain. It wasn't about evidence or proof. It was about a feeling. A gentle stirring inside his chest that made him feel more connected to the desert than ever before. He began to spend more time outside, walking slowly along the edge of the restricted zone, not to trespass, but simply to be near, to listen, to feel. The desert, in its quiet wisdom, seemed to welcome him. The wind was always soft when he was near, the sand cool beneath his feet. Birds sang just a little longer. The light lingered on the rocks like a warm blanket. Eliot believed that the land remembered those who treated it gently, and in return, it shared its peace. Sometimes Eliot would sit on a rock for hours, doing nothing, just watching, waiting, thinking. He never brought a camera or a phone. He brought only his notebook and a smooth stone he liked to hold in his hand. It helped him think. He called it his thought stone, though he wasn't sure why. It had no special powers. It simply felt good to hold. On one particularly still evening, Eliot noticed something unusual. The air had grown cooler than expected, and a faint vibration seemed to ripple through the ground. It wasn't loud, it wasn't alarming. It was more like a pulse, a heartbeat deep beneath the earth. He placed his hand on the sand and felt it again, a soft thrum like a distant drum. He closed his eyes and listened. He didn't hear machines or engines or anything unnatural. What he heard was music, not in the way we hear with ears, but with something quieter, deeper, a rhythm, a pattern. He smiled. The desert was singing again, and Eliot was listening. The next morning he wrote in his journal, "I think there is more happening here than what we see. But it does not want to be found. It wants to be felt. I will not search. I will wait. I will be patient. The desert knows what it is doing." After writing, he placed the journal on the shelf with the others and went outside to his garden. He had a few cactus plants, some sage, and a single blooming desert rose that only opened at night. He called it Luna. It was his favorite. While tending to Luna, Eliot saw a woman walking slowly along the road. She wore a long silver scarf that trailed behind her like moonlight. She moved with grace, as if each step was part of a dance. Eliot watched from a distance, not wanting to disturb her, but she turned and looked at him. She smiled, a small, knowing smile. Then she continued walking. That night, Eliot couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the woman. There was something about her, something familiar and ancient, like she belonged to the desert itself. He wondered if she was a traveler, a wanderer like him, or perhaps someone who had once known the truth he was quietly brushing against. The days passed gently. Eliot continued his routines, but his curiosity was beginning to grow. Still, it was not a restless curiosity. It was soft, quiet, like a candle flickering in the distance. He didn't want to disturb anything. He just wanted to understand. So he read more. He reread old articles, personal journals, and desert folklore. He studied maps and marked old rumors about glowing lights and strange events. Not because he believed everything, but because he knew that even stories held a kind of truth, the truth of wonder. Eliot started leaving small offerings near the edge of the restricted zone, not to attract anything, but to show respect. A feather, a poem, a smooth stone, a single flower. He placed them gently on the sand and whispered, "Thank you." It felt right. One evening, while sitting by the fire pit outside his home, Eliot saw the silver light again. It hovered, just for a moment, then disappeared behind a hill. He didn't get up. He didn't chase it. He just smiled, sipped his tea, and whispered to the stars, "I see you." That night, His dreams were vivid. He dreamed of tall, glowing trees with leaves that hummed like lullabies. He walked through a quiet forest under a violet sky, and in the distance he saw the woman with the silver scarf. She looked at him, placed her hand over her heart, and nodded. Then she vanished into light. When Eliot awoke, he didn't feel startled. He felt calm, the kind of calm that lingers long after the dream has ended. He opened his window and let the morning air fill the room. It smelled of sage and silence, a perfect scent for thinking. He sat at his desk and wrote, "I believe the universe speaks in symbols, in signs, in small moments. Most of us are too loud to hear it, but I'm learning. I'm learning to listen. And maybe, just maybe, the truth doesn't want to be shouted. It wants to be whispered." And so, Eliot's quiet curiosity continued, not as a quest, but as a journey, not to uncover secrets, but to embrace the mystery. He had become part of the desert's rhythm, part of its silence, and perhaps, in that silence, he would one day find what he wasn't even looking for. But for now, he was content to sit by his window, watch the sky change colors, and listen to the world move slowly, softly, peacefully. The truth about Area 51, Eliot believed, was not hidden in shadows or locked behind doors. It was floating in the air, resting in the sand, whispering in the wind. And if you were quiet enough, gentle enough, and patient enough, you might just hear it too. The following days passed like falling feathers, slowly and gently, each one silent and soft as it landed in Eliot's life. His time at the desert had taught him how to read the quiet. A slight shift in the wind, a distant echo, the way a shadow stretched a little longer than it should. These were all part of the language the desert spoke, and Eliot had become fluent in it. One morning, just before dawn, Eliot was stirred from sleep by something unusual. It wasn't a sound or a dream. It was a feeling, a sense that the air itself had changed. He stepped outside, barefoot, and looked to the sky. The stars were still visible, hanging like silent watchers over the sleeping land. But there, just above the hills to the north, was a faint ripple. Not a cloud, not light. A shimmer, like the surface of water catching moonlight. He didn't move toward it. He simply stood and breathed. The wind wrapped around him, not cold, not warm, just there. Present, whispering. Eliot closed his eyes. For a moment he imagined it was speaking to him, not in words, but in emotion, comfort, curiosity, a call to pay attention. He spent the day walking the desert, listening. Every sound, every gust of wind, every crunch beneath his feet felt intentional. He paused often, kneeling beside small plants or rocks, pressing his ear to the earth. He wasn't trying to discover anything. He was allowing the desert to show him what it wanted him to see. At sunset, he found himself back at the same place where the shimmer had appeared. He stood quietly, letting the last of the day's light bathe the ground in gold. And then, so faint he almost didn't notice, a whisper drifted through the air. It wasn't a voice, it wasn't language. It was a feeling and sound, like the wind carried an old story wrapped in song. Eliot listened, letting it wash over him. He didn't try to remember it or write it down. He just let it be. And for a brief moment he felt he understood something ancient, something forgotten by time but remembered by the land. That evening he sat by the fire again, his journal open but empty. For once, he didn't feel the need to write. He watched the flames dance and thought about the shimmer, the wind, the desert. He thought about the woman with the silver scarf and wondered if she too heard the whispers. The stars were bright that night, so bright that they seemed to lean closer. Eliot whispered to them, not with questions, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the quiet, for the mystery, for the gentle unfolding of something he didn't need to understand to believe in. He dreamed again. This time he was standing in a wide, open field of soft grass that swayed like waves under a sky made of liquid amethyst. The woman was there again, this time standing by an arch made of light. She extended her hand, and though he didn't move, he felt as though he'd taken it. He felt warmth, like standing in sunlight on a cold morning. She spoke, not in words, but in thought. "You're listening, that is enough." When he woke, he felt rested, as if he hadn't just slept, but been restored. That morning, Eliot wrote a single line in his journal. Sometimes the world speaks in whispers, because only those who are truly quiet will hear. And so, the days moved forward like wind over sand. Eliot no longer wondered if he was imagining things. He didn't doubt the shimmer or the whispers. He had no need for answers. He had peace. But the desert wasn't finished with him yet. Not even close. The fourth day began like any other, with the quiet shuffle of morning wind, a soft beam of sunlight through the curtain, and the scent of sagebrush floating in the air. Eliot made tea, scribbled a few half-formed thoughts in his journal, and decided to visit the edge of town again. There was a trail there, barely marked, that led into the desert's arms. He walked for over an hour, letting the vastness of the land absorb his thoughts. Everything around him breathed silence, and then, as he paused by a strange rock formation, two smooth stones stacked unnaturally, he noticed a low, rhythmic hum. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't from the wind. It seemed to rise from the ground itself. Curious, Eliot placed his hand on the earth. The vibration was faint, but there, like a hidden heartbeat beneath the sand. He followed the sound, letting it guide his steps until he reached a dry, cracked riverbed. There, nestled between two ridges, was something half buried, a metal hatch, rusted and covered with dust. It didn't look military. It looked forgotten. Eliot hesitated, the hum stronger now, vibrating in his feet. He crouched beside the hatch, brushing it off carefully. There was no handle, no lock, just a circle etched into its center. He touched it. Instantly, the hum stopped. The silence that followed was deep and wide, like the desert had held its breath. He sat there for a long time, not trying to open it, just listening. The wind picked up, swirling gently around him. He thought he heard a voice, distant and soft. Not from below, but from within himself. A memory, perhaps, or something older. "You are close," it seemed to say. That night, Eliot returned to town, but he couldn't sleep. The image of the hatch stayed with him, as did the vibration. He dreamt of tunnels under the earth filled with soft light, where ancient machines lay sleeping, not built by people, but by something else, something gentle, something wise. In the dream, he walked through the tunnels until he found a chamber of echoes. Each whisper he'd ever heard in the wind was there, circling him like bird song. He stood in the center, eyes closed, and heard them all at once. And in their harmony, there was peace. He awoke just before dawn, not afraid, but curious. He didn't know what lay beneath the hatch, but he knew he would return. The morning after the dream, Eliot woke with a calm yet undeniable pull inside his chest. The image of the hidden hatch and the vibrations that had echoed through the earth still lingered in his memory, not fading with time, but deepening, He rose slowly, made tea without turning on the lights, and stood at the edge of his porch. The desert stretched before him, vast and golden beneath the new morning sun. And the wind, always the wind, whispered its silent invitation once more. Eliot packed a small bag, a bottle of water, a flashlight, his journal, and the smooth stone he'd picked up days earlier from the riverbed. It wasn't a lucky charm, just a reminder, a quiet witness to what he'd seen. Before leaving, he slipped a note beneath his tea mug for the woman with the silver scarf. It read, "Going where the silence hums." The walk to the dry riverbed felt different today. The trail had not changed, but Eliot had. He noticed how the sand moved in ripples as if remembering water, how the cactus shadows stretched like reaching fingers. The closer he got, the stronger the feeling became. Not anxiety, not excitement, but a grounded knowing, as if he was going not to uncover something new, but to meet something that had been waiting. The hatch was still there, half covered in dust, silent, but now the hum returned. Not through the air, but from within the earth, gentle and rhythmic, like breath. He knelt beside it, brushing away the grit with his palm. The circle etched in the center pulsed faintly in the light, as though catching the sun in a rhythm not visible before. Eliot placed his hand on the circle. The hum stopped. A long, still pause followed. Then, without a sound, the hatch shifted. It didn't open abruptly. It simply softened, its hard lines fading until what had been solid metal looked more like water, like a curtain gently parting. Beneath it was a tunnel, not deep or dark, but softly lit from within by an amber glow. No stairs, just a slope, smooth and welcoming. Eliot hesitated, not out of fear, but out of awe. He stepped inside. The air was warmer, tinged with something floral and ancient. The walls glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. The tunnel didn't lead downward far. Instead, it curved gently until he emerged into a circular chamber. The floor was made of stone etched with flowing patterns, lines like wind paths, like rivers branching into infinity. At the center was a pillar. Floating above it, a sphere of light. It did not dazzle. It did not flash. It pulsed slowly like it was breathing. Eliot stepped forward, heart steady, and stood before it. The moment he came close, memories flooded his mind. Not his own, but fragments of thoughts, feelings, impressions. A woman laughing in another time. A tree growing under stars unseen by human eyes. A child drawing patterns in the sand. None of it was threatening, none of it loud. It was like being wrapped in story, wrapped in understanding without words. And then, like a breeze on his skin, he felt a message. You listened. The voice was not male or female, not alien or human. It was simply presence. You listened when others only looked. You heard the silence. You felt the wind. Eliot closed his eyes. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't overwhelmed. He simply breathed. Why me? He thought, not with doubt, but with curiosity. And the presence responded, not in words, but in feeling. Because you did not come to take. You came to witness. You came to remember. Tears welled up in Eliot's eyes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming peace that filled the room. The peace of being seen, of being understood by something far older than language. The light began to fade, not into darkness, but into stillness. The hum returned, soft, steady, beneath his feet. He opened his eyes. The chamber had changed. It was just stone again. The light was gone. But the memory, the presence, remained. Eliot turned and made his way back up the tunnel. When he emerged into the desert sunlight, everything looked the same. The wind still danced across the sand. The horizon still shimmered. But Eliot was different. He stood quietly, letting the wind embrace him. He felt no need to tell anyone what he had seen. No need to prove anything. The truth had spoken to him in silence, and that was enough. He began the walk back to Rachel, the desert stretching out before him, timeless and vast, and behind him, beneath the earth, the hum continued, gentle, eternal, a heartbeat waiting for the next listener. As Eliot walked back to Rachel, the sun reached its high point in the sky, casting long shadows along the desert floor. The wind continued its soft song, curling around rock formations and scattering the sand like whispers across the earth. But now, Eliot felt different. The quiet hum beneath the earth still pulsed in his memory, like a new rhythm had been stitched into the fabric of his being. He walked slowly, not out of fatigue, but to savor every step, every grain of sand under his boots, every sound the silence gave him. When he returned to the diner, the town had not changed. The same gentle quiet filled the dusty streets, and the same sleepy air floated through the open windows. But Eliot saw everything with new eyes. He noticed how the curtains fluttered in rhythm with the breeze, how the old signs creaked softly as if trying to speak. He took a seat at his usual booth, and before long, the woman with the silver scarf approached him, her eyes soft, knowing. "You went," she said, not as a question, but as a truth. Eliot nodded. "Yes, I listened, and I saw." She sat down across from him without a word and poured 2 cups of tea. They drank in silence for a few minutes, the kind of silence that said more than speech. Finally, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out an old, folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table to him. "Others have gone before you, not many, only the quiet ones, those who don't ask the wrong questions." Eliot unfolded the paper carefully. On it were hand-drawn lines forming a map of the surrounding desert, marked with small symbols, circles, spirals, triangles. Some he recognized from the chamber beneath the earth. Others were new, but all of them stirred something within him, like puzzle pieces he hadn't known were missing. "What are these?" he asked softly. "Stories left behind. Each one holds a whisper," she replied. "Not to be read like a book, to be felt, walked, sat with." Eliot stared at the map. The symbols weren't arranged like destinations, but more like melodies, each note placed with care, inviting the traveler to move at their own pace, to discover not answers, but presence. He looked up, and for the first time, he noticed the faint tattoo on the inside of the woman's wrist, a small circle with a line through it, just like the one on the hatch. She caught him looking and smiled. "We are the keepers of quiet, not protectors, not guards, just listeners. We stay so that the world remembers to listen." That night, Eliot didn't go back to the old motel. Instead, he walked the edges of Rachel, sitting beneath trees, touching stones, listening to the way the town spoke through silence. In one alley, he found an old mural, half faded with time, showing a child holding a lantern beneath the stars. In another, he found a cat watching him with golden eyes, as if guarding a secret. The next morning, Eliot took the map and walked out into the desert again. Not toward the hatch this time, but toward the symbols drawn in the margins. His first stop was a spiraled rock formation, where the wind made a strange echo. When he sat among the stones, he heard laughter, soft like a memory caught in the air. No people were there, just the presence of something old, waiting to be remembered. The second place was marked with a triangle. He found it near the edge of a dried lake bed, where the ground shimmered with heat and mirage. There, the silence felt heavier, like a veil. He sat again, breathing slowly, and felt the air thicken with thought. His own thoughts quieted. In their place, emotion bubbled up, memories he hadn't visited in years. A lost friend, a long-forgotten promise, a moment of kindness from a stranger when he was a child. And through it all, the hum returned, subtle, comforting. Each symbol on the map became a place to remember, not in his mind, but in his soul. Places where the world paused just long enough for something beyond words to be felt. Eliot took notes in his journal, not in full sentences, but in lines and images. A wind that turned back on itself, a stone that sang when the sun hit it just right, a trail of ants that moved like a message. One evening, while camped beneath the open sky near the final mark on the map, Eliot watched the stars. They didn't twinkle like city stars. They burned steady and deep. As he lay on his back, the ground humming faintly beneath him, he saw a slow movement in the sky, not a plane, not a satellite, just a soft shift of light, almost like a sigh. And then he heard it. Not a voice, not a sound, but a presence. "Thank you for listening," he smiled, closed his eyes, and slept beneath the vast sky, the map beside him, the hum within him. Back in Rachel, the woman with the silver scarf lit a candle in the diner window. She did not worry. She knew Eliot would return when he was ready. Not because he had to, but because that is what the quiet ones always did. They returned, to listen, to sit, to remember, and to whisper the truth to the next traveler who dared to ask. Not with their mouth, but with their heart. Eliot woke slowly, as if time had folded itself gently around him. The desert air was crisp, and the stars above had begun to fade into the soft lavender light of dawn. He sat up, brushing the sand from his jacket, and looked around the silent landscape. Everything felt still, yet alive. The world held its breath, waiting. Beside him, the map lay where he had left it, fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. One last symbol remained. It was different from the others. Not a shape, but an eye drawn with delicate strokes. It rested at the edge of the map, near a slope that descended into a long-forgotten valley. He packed his things slowly, methodically, savoring the motion. Every step he took toward that final mark felt like a step inward, a descent not only into the valley, but into the softest corners of his own consciousness. There was no rush. There never was, not in places like this. As he arrived at the valley's edge, he saw it, a narrow trail winding down into a basin of sagebrush and sun-bleached stones. In the center stood a structure, small and round, half buried in the earth. It looked like a natural formation until he saw the doorway, an arch made from stone so perfectly balanced they must have been placed with purpose. Eliot approached slowly, stepping into the ring of stillness that surrounded the structure. As he drew near, he noticed symbols carved into the rocks around the doorway. They glowed faintly in the dawn light, not with any artificial light, but as though the stones themselves remembered the sun. Inside, the space opened into a single room with a domed ceiling. The roof had a circular window at its peak, perfectly positioned to frame the sky above. At the center of the room sat a single stone bench and a smooth platform of polished rock, shaped like an open book. He sat and waited. There were no sounds but his own breathing, and even that seemed to fade. The space held a deep quiet, the kind that comforted rather than unsettled. It was a place meant for one thing: watching, and so Eliot watched. The stars faded, and the sky turned blue, then golden. Birds circled overhead, but they didn't enter the valley. The sun rose until it hovered directly above the circular window, casting a beam of light straight down onto the stone platform. And then something happened. The light bent. It didn't reflect. It didn't scatter. It bent inward, folding in on itself in a slow spiral, like a whisper being drawn back into a mouth. Eliot leaned forward slightly, not with urgency, but with awe. The beam of light pulsed, then stilled. From the platform, images began to emerge, not projected, but felt. He saw landscapes unlike Earth's, but familiar in their emotion. Fields of blue grasses waving in a windless plain. Towers of crystal growing from oceans of quiet. Faces, not human, not alien, just presence. Smiling, watching, listening. He didn't try to make sense of it. He only received, the way one receives the warmth of a fire or the hush of snow. He closed his eyes, and the images continued, not just in his mind, but in his chest, his breath, the very rhythm of his heartbeat. And then a voice, not spoken, not heard, but there. We are the spaces between questions. We are what remains when you stop seeking answers. Eliot opened his eyes. The images faded. The light returned to its natural shape, and the dome above returned to simply being a dome. He rose slowly, a sense of reverence guiding each movement. As he left the structure, the world seemed clearer, but not in the way of understanding, more in the way of acceptance. The valley welcomed him like an old friend, and he stood for a moment, listening to the wind. Before he turned to leave, he noticed a small stone near the doorway. A symbol was etched onto its surface, an eye, just like the one on the map. Without thinking, he reached into his pocket and placed the map beneath the stone as if that were what it had always wanted. He walked out of the valley, the day warming around him, and returned to Rachel. The town hadn't changed. It was still sleepy, still quiet. But now he understood why. Rachel was not a place of secrets. It was a place of stillness, of pause. The diner's bell rang as he entered. The woman with the silver scarf smiled, as if greeting an old friend rather than welcoming someone back. "You found it," she said. Eliot only nodded. And then he asked the only question left to ask. "What now?" She poured him tea, her hands steady, her eyes soft. "Now," she said, "you rest. You let the story tell you for a while." He understood, because some stories aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be experienced, like a long, gentle breeze over the desert, or the hum beneath the earth that never truly leaves you. The days in Rachel stretched like soft cloth hung in the warm desert breeze. Eliot stayed, not because he had to, but because the silence there held him like a cradle. Time moved differently now. Mornings began with tea, evenings ended under the stars, and in between he wandered. Never too far, never with a purpose. The town had grown quieter, or perhaps he had simply learned to hear its natural rhythm. In those silent hours, he began to notice things others might miss. A crow circling overhead 3 times before perching silently on a rusted fence post. The way the sand outside the diner glowed a soft silver just before twilight. The subtle pulse beneath the earth when he placed his hand against the old wooden post by the road. These weren't coincidences. They were part of the desert's slow language. One afternoon, he walked the path beyond the diner, past the leaning water tower and the rows of abandoned trailers. In the distance, he saw something glinting on the horizon. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it called to him in that quiet way only the desert could. He followed it, not with haste, but with patience, like one returns to a half-remembered dream. It led him to a dry lakebed, flat, cracked, and ghostly in the sun. In its center stood a single object, a large, polished disk embedded in the earth. It had no markings, no seams, and no explanation, just smooth, perfect stone, cool to the touch even beneath the desert sun. As Eliot stood there, a breeze picked up, not forceful, but full of memory, the kind of wind that carries whispers, and for a brief moment the silence of the desert changed. It didn't break, it deepened, as though something ancient and vast had inhaled. The wind settled. Eliot stepped back. The disk had changed, ever so slightly. Its surface now reflected the sky in impossible detail. Every cloud, every shadow of a bird flying overhead. But when he looked closer, he saw stars. Stars that didn't belong to the current sky. Constellations no chart had ever named. A mirror to something far beyond. He sat beside it, placing his hand gently on the surface. No vision came this time, no voice, just a feeling, a sense of something watching, not with judgment, but with kindness, with patience, with the timeless curiosity of a traveler who has seen many worlds and still stops to admire a single flower. He stayed there until the sky turned deep blue, and the first stars began to appear. The disk slowly dulled with the falling light, returning to its original, featureless form. Eliot rose, brushing dust from his sleeves, and turned back toward Rachel. There were no answers in the disk, but there was peace, and sometimes that was more important. Back in town, the woman with the silver scarf waited outside the diner. She didn't speak as he approached. She only handed him a folded piece of paper, old and worn at the edges. He opened it slowly. Inside was a poem, written in careful, looping script. In places where no words are said, and stars watch silently overhead, there lies a truth not meant to find, but felt like warmth inside the mind. He looked up, but she had already gone inside. The lights in the diner flickered on, casting a soft golden hue over the quiet street. Eliot folded the poem and placed it in his pocket. He didn't need to know who had written it. He didn't need to understand why the disk was there or what it meant. All he needed was this feeling of being part of something vast and gentle, something that watched from the stars but lived in the quiet moments between thoughts. That night, he sat under the sky once more. The stars blinked slowly, like old friends. Somewhere far away, beyond the edges of maps and memory, mysteries still swirled and shimmered. But here, in Rachel, in the hush of the desert, Eliot had found something rarer than answers. He had found stillness. Night had settled over Rachel like a soft blanket, woven from starlight and desert air, the kind of night that hummed quietly with secrets. Eliot sat on the steps of his temporary home, a small trailer tucked behind the diner, the metal warm from the sun's memory. The sky above was impossibly wide, a dark ocean scattered with stars, each one flickering like a lighthouse to a passing traveler. He had begun to notice patterns in the stars, shapes and alignments that didn't match any constellations in the books he once browsed at the old library. These patterns weren't random. They came and went like visitors, Some formed arrows, others resembled symbols he had seen etched faintly on the disk in the lakebed. The sky, it seemed, was speaking. Each evening he sat in silence, watching, listening, feeling. The stars would shift gently, always just enough to keep him guessing. But Eliot no longer sought explanation. He knew now that some things weren't meant to be solved. They were meant to be experienced, like a melody that lingers in your thoughts or the warmth of a fire long after it fades. One night, just past midnight, a low hum filled the air. Not loud, not harsh, more like the sound of a cello played far away. Eliot stood, drawn toward the open desert beyond the town's edge. The sand underfoot felt soft, like walking on memory. As he reached the lakebed again, he saw the disk glowing faintly. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Above it, something new. The stars had rearranged, not in chaos, but in a perfect ring, like a crown. At its center, a slow-moving light descended, not fast like a meteor, but gentle, like a falling leaf. It stopped just above the disk, hovering with impossible stillness. It was not a ship, at least not in the way science might describe one. It was shape and light, sound and silence. A presence. Eliot didn't move. He only stood, hands at his sides, his breath slow and calm. The light shimmered, and then, without words, it spoke. Not in language, but in feeling. Peace, wonder, home. The messages poured into him like rain into dry soil, images of places far beyond Earth's reach, planets with oceans that glowed at night, skies filled with colors no human eye had seen, and people, not human, not alien, but simply beings, gentle, curious, and full of song. The presence showed Eliot that Earth was just one room in a vast house of stars, that life was everywhere, quietly watching, patiently waiting for those ready to listen, not with radios or telescopes, but with their hearts. Then, as suddenly as it came, the light began to rise. The crown of stars slowly unraveled, drifting back into familiar constellations. The disk beneath Eliot's feet dimmed and cooled, its message delivered. Eliot stood in the silence, eyes wide, not with fear, but with awe. He didn't feel small. He felt part of something vast and beautiful, like a note in a never-ending song. Back in Rachel, the lights in the diner were off, but the silver-scarfed woman was there, sitting alone on the bench outside. She looked up as he approached and offered a small smile. No words passed between them. None were needed. She simply placed a hand gently over her heart and nodded. Inside the trailer, Eliot wrote in his notebook for the first time in weeks. He didn't try to describe what he had seen. Instead, he wrote how he felt. Calm, open, ready. Ready for the unknown, the beautiful, the endless. He fell asleep with the window open, the desert wind whispering softly through the screen. Somewhere, high above, the stars blinked again, content that their message had been heard. And for the first time in a long time, Eliot dreamed not of answers, but of journeys. Morning arrived slowly in Rachel, as if the desert itself was reluctant to wake. A faint golden light crept over the edge of the mountains, softening every outline, brushing every rooftop with a quiet glow. Eliot stirred from his slumber, not with haste or alarm, but with the peaceful rhythm of someone who had slept soundly, wrapped in the arms of the earth itself. The town was silent as it always was at dawn. Birds fluttered in the scrub outside his window, and the wind moved like a gentle hand across the sand. Eliot sat up, stretching his arms, feeling not just rested but light, as if part of the weight he had carried had simply lifted. He stepped outside, barefoot, letting the coolness of the ground anchor him. Over the past days, weeks perhaps, though time had lost its urgency, he had changed, not outwardly, but within. Something had quieted, and something else had awakened. He walked toward the edge of town where the desert began. No bag, no plan, just his notebook tucked under one arm and a flask of warm tea. He passed the diner. The silver-scarfed woman stood outside, her eyes kind and knowing. She raised her hand, not in farewell, but in quiet blessing. Eliot nodded, understanding without needing to ask. As he reached the lake bed one final time, he felt the stillness, not emptiness, not absence, but a presence too vast to speak. The disk was no longer visible, yet he knew it was still there, hidden beneath layers of dust and time, waiting for another soul who might one day be ready. He sat on a small rock at the edge of the dry basin, sipped his tea, and opened his notebook. But today, he didn't write. He simply watched the sky as the sun began to climb. Clouds moved lazily across the heavens, and the air carried a soft warmth that made his eyes close gently. In that hush, a memory rose, not a memory of something that had happened, but something that had always been. A voice, not with words, but with essence, whispered through him. It said, "You are not alone. You have never been alone. We are all part of the same quiet song." And with that whisper, the final thread of doubt unwound and drifted away, like smoke on the breeze. Back in Rachel, life continued at its own unhurried pace. The trucks rumbled through on long-haul nights. The stars blinked in their ancient rhythm. The silver-scarfed woman still waited outside the diner, handing out folded papers to those who passed through, each one containing a single line of the sky's poem. Eliot remained a while longer, but not forever. One day he would leave Rachel, not because he was restless, but because he understood. The truth about Area 51, about the stars, about the voices and lights and silent knowing. It wasn't a secret to be kept. It was a feeling to be carried. And wherever he went next, he would carry it gently, like a lantern in the dark. The desert would remember him, the stars would smile, and on quiet nights, if one listened closely, the wind still whispered his name. Eliot, the seeker who found peace in the silence, the dreamer who stopped chasing and started listening. And so, dear listener, as your own eyes begin to grow heavy and the stars outside your window begin their quiet vigil, may this story be your lullaby, a soft echo of wonder, a reminder that you too are a part of the vast and gentle mystery. Good night from the sleepy philosopher.